Hey folks, I'm Chuck Black. We're doing 52 weeks of Python in 10-minute sessions. We are beginning a module on networking. We're going to start by talking about Netmiko. We're going to, in this lesson, describe the different ways these packages are built on one another. We will look at the code that actually does Netmiko stuff, sending commands, establishing connections, etc. So that's what we're doing. Let's get started. So we're beginning our discussion on talking to devices and other stuff in the network. This is module 4, networking, and we'll be talking about Netmiko and Napalm and PyShark and Nmap and Scapy and maybe some other stuff as well. But before we get into that, you need to understand a little bit about what we're talking about, especially when talking to networking devices. Now, there are a number of Python packages out there that you may be inclined to use. Let me show you their relationship to one another. Paramiko is basically a package that helps you to do SSH type stuff. You must handle the login and differences between commands and differences in output. And of course, you have to write your own code. If you choose to use Netmiko, which we're going over this week, then you will only need to handle command differences and output differences. You don't have to worry so much about the login. If you use Napalm, they've done a level of abstraction such that you don't have to worry about command differences or output differences. Napalm, in theory anyway, handles it for you. And as you can see from this picture, these are all built on top of each other. Now, they're independent packages that were just developed independently but make use of each other. Now, there's other stuff going on. One of the nice things about the abstraction you get with Napalm is you can do things to multiple vendors using multiple protocols, and you use just the one Napalm interface. That makes it really easy. If you live in the Juniper world, they have a package called PyEasy, which abstracts this for you as well and use netconf underneath, so it works with all of your Juniper devices. Cisco has a plethora of different Python application functionality that lives in many different areas. Unfortunately, Cisco has many different product families, and so it's not, in my experience, as smooth and easy as this PyEasy, but there is Cisco functionality available. Anyway, let's move on to talking about Netmiko. Before we get too far, I want to point out that although this code is set up to work with multiple different devices, as you can see down here from my Quokka Prime, only one of those devices is available. Consequently, when I say cycle through devices, I'm only going to be cycling through iOS XR because that's the only one that's answering at this moment. These are Cisco always-on devices, which I think they should rename to probably, possibly, maybe on instead of always, because that's been my experience. Anyway, let's continue. Now, as we look at this code, I want you to look at stuff like this. I am setting the bar pretty high for those of you that are new to software development, okay? I'm expecting you to learn how Python works, how to write software, how to be more than just a script kiddie or somebody who copies things off of the internet. I want you to understand how things work, and consequently, this thing that I'm going to be doing here is going to be utilizing Python skills. So I strongly encourage you to learn and understand what this is. It's just a simple Python dictionary, and what it's allowing me to do is to go through iOS, NXOS, iOS XR type of devices, and I can do this nice handy for loop. My for loop, the list here, would normally have iOS and NXOS, and it would look like this. Unfortunately, I can't talk to those other devices because of Cisco's not so only on, so I'm only doing it with one, but I've written this code once and it will work for all three different types of devices. So understand that you need to raise or level up your Python programming game in order to understand some of this stuff as we begin to go forward. Now let me describe Netmiko to you at a relatively high level. This is something that I wrote. We're going to dive down into that in just a minute. This is connecting to the device. Once I have connected to the device, then what we end up doing, we get a connection back, and we're going to use that connection object to do send commands. Do you see this? I'm doing send command, send command, send command, send command. What command am I sending? Well, if you were paying attention before, then you probably saw, oh, look, here are the commands that he's going to use. Now, show IP route is the same for all these different devices, but you'll notice little differences when we do a show ARP with iOS or iOS XR. We just do a show ARP. With NXOS, we need to do a show IP ARP. So there's going to be differences. iOS says show interfaces description. NXOS says show interface. Again, iOS has IP in here. So you need to understand what command you are going to be sending, and you need to understand your type of device that you're talking to in order to do that. Now, I mentioned before that you need to understand the output differences when you do Netmiko. So the output is going to be different in your different device types. You'll have to deal with it. I did not do that in this portion of the code. I'm just printing it out. In this lower portion, which we are not going to have time to go through, look at the long form version. I get the version from the device, and then I actually go through and do regular expression stuff. If you want to learn about regular expression, look at this and you'll figure out how I did regular expression examination of the show version output so that I can get the exact version number. And that's the code that I do to show you stuff like this. It's a non-trivial thing that you do need to do, so understand that. All right, back to this. Hopefully you understand the general idea. We do a connection, and then we do send command and get the output, and then we have to deal with the output. Now let's dive down into Netmiko Connect. I'm doing Control B. It's taking me to Netmiko Connect. Now what Netmiko is going to do, this is the key thing that you do with Netmiko in order to set up a connection to your devices. You're going to create a Netmiko connection object, and you're going to pass in the host name, and you will pass in the port, as you can see, the username, the password, and this is important. You need to pass in the device type, and that has to match what they call their device type. So they have special names. It helps them to understand how to deal with login type of stuff. So this is what we do. We're creating an object of class Netmiko connection effectively, and we're going to return that in our code. We're going to take this connection, and then we will begin using it to do send commands, etc. Now let's look at where I got this data from. You'll not be surprised to see that I had to comment these things out, so I'm really not caring about these different ones. Now that I think about it, I probably didn't need to comment those out. I could have left them here, and I just am not really exercising those. But Netmiko Connect, I will be doing with iOS XR. You can see I'm using port 22. This is the username and password for that device, and the device type is Cisco iOS. So the commands are going to be for logging in, and what it expects back is going to be consistent with Cisco iOS because it is an iOS type of device. And so that is our connection. That's how we get started. Once we have that connection, you can see that we are returning it here, and that's what we use in order to do all of our send command. Okay, let's remind ourselves what we talked about in our lightning fast discussion of Netmiko. We talked about how these different packages add on to functionality that's found in Paramiko, Netmiko, and then eventually Napalm. We looked at the code and we saw that you need to be sharp with your Python skills. We talked about how only iOS XR is available currently. We talked about how you'll do a connection, and once you've done a connection, then you can use that to send commands, which may be different depending on the type of device that you're talking to, and then you get the output. If you're interested in further stuff, which I go through, look at the long form version of this when other versions, actually sandbox versions, were available, and you may be interested in that. Hopefully that makes sense. As always, if you want more information, you can look at the long form version or let me know. And thanks for listening.